Welcome back. Looks like Melissa McCarthy is out of a job. Sean Spicer's alter ego on Saturday Night Live captured the sometimes surreal and combative drama of Sean Spicer's brief 6-month tenure as White House press secretary. Spicy is out, but it's the president himself stepping on his own agenda. Earlier in the week, he put Republican senators on notice to get an Obamacare repeal and replace to his desk for a signature, then changed the subject by telling the New York Times he regretted hiring Jeff Sessions as Attorney General because of his recusal in the Russia investigation. And then word Trump wants to know if he can pardon aides, family members, and perhaps even himself. And the focus this week was supposed to be on Buy American. Joining us for analysis of the week in Washington is Rita Ferrandino of the Sarasota County Democratic Party, David Jolly, a former Republican congressman from Pinellas County, and Zach Anderson, political reporter of the Herald Tribune. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Great to be with you.
I'm curious what all of you are thinking about. I mean, it's Friday, so there must be late breaking news. We have Sean Spicer out. You know, David, it's hard for any press secretary, no matter how good they are, to have a consistent message when the boss is kind of like freelancing on their own.
Well, that's true. And listen, I think it's a universal truth that Sean Spicer had the hardest job in Washington. We know that. And look, I'm no defender of Donald Trump, but I would also say Sean Spicer was bad at his job. I mean, truly. So the role and responsibility of the press secretary is to give voice to the president's agenda. And when you're being lampooned on Saturday Night Live, you're clearly falling short of that. But he couldn't do that with an administration that continued to lie, that continue a president who undermined his own staff, if you will. This is also a bigger narrative, though, of whether or not the president is retooling for a very hard fight on Russia and doing away with the establishment D.C. Beltway Republicans like Priebus and Spicer and others, and doubling down on this Donald Trump, drain the swamp, bring in the hard punchers like we're seeing with Scaramucci.
You know, as I mentioned at the outset, you know, right when he was trying to push the Republican senators on bringing up Obamacare repeal and replace again, he gives this interview to the New York Times where he says he regrets hiring Jeff Sessions as Attorney General. Late breaking news, folks. The Washington Post is reporting that Sessions was caught up on an intercept by the intelligence community talking about the campaign with the Russians. Rita, what do you make of that?
I think that Donald Trump wants him fired. He wants him gone. And so I think it's really interesting that all of a sudden he is, Donald Trump says he wants him gone, and then this gets leaked.
Zach?
I think it just shows that the Russian stuff is just a drip, 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 and it's a huge problem for Trump right now. You know, he still is holding a large majority of Republicans are behind him. You know, you look at polls and his approval rating with Republicans is somewhere 70–80%, but it's not necessarily whether he's holding the base right now that is his biggest issue. His biggest issue is a legal issue, and his legal issue are these questions about collusion and all these other issues that the Russian investigation raises. And so far, it just looks like it's getting worse and worse. You know, we heard this week that he's actually been looking at trying to figure out if he could pardon himself or members of his family. And, you know, people usually don't look into that unless they're concerned for some reason.
And David, there was a story that was published today raising the issue of how long or what will it take for congressional Republicans to say, don't go that far? Is it if he fired the special counsel? Is it involving Sessions? Is it pardons? You were there. You know what these folks are thinking.
Unfortunately, I actually think it will require some evidence of criminal activity, and maybe that's the Mueller report. Understand that Clinton impeachment really caught wind when we knew there was perjury under oath. The President of the United States had lied, some form of criminal or civil violation, if you will. But let's not underestimate Donald Trump. He is somebody, a strategist, who found a way to get elected to be President of the United States. He's a guy who sees the clouds gathering, if you will. 2 weeks before we learned of the Donald Trump Jr. meeting with the Russians, they actually hired attorneys to protect Donald Trump Jr. Earlier this week, Donald Trump distanced himself from Jeff Sessions, and tonight we learn there's more information about Jeff Sessions. Donald Trump, whether you like him or not, whether you think he's good for the country or not, he is a smart chess player, and I think that's what we're seeing with today's firing, essentially, of Sean Spicer, bringing in a new spokesperson.
Rita, do you have any thoughts or hopes from your position that should this get worse, that Republicans in the Congress will say, Mr. President, you can't go this far?
So I want to just go back to what Zach was talking about with the fact that Donald Trump seems to be holding his base. Because I think what we're seeing is that there's been a slow erosion of his base. And I think that there was a Reuters poll and report that just came out, which said 1 of 8 Republicans who have self-identified themselves as having voted for Donald Trump would not do it further. So it's slowly starting to happen. And a lot of what you're reading about with the Republicans' approval rating is Republicans that are selecting themselves to say they're Republicans, because often the ones that don't believe in what Donald Trump are doing aren't calling themselves Republicans anymore. Do you have any comment there?
Those Republicans have nowhere to go, though. And we saw this in Georgia 6, right? It was a special election that Democrats really should have won. It was a district that President Trump won by 1.5 points. But frankly, Republicans were able to hold that. And I'm a center-right Republican who says today, I don't know where to go in this Republican Party, but it's not to the Democrats. And I think that the question is, where do those 1 in 8 that Rita speaks of, where do they go?
Because, Zach, you talk to folks around here all the time, and you know that with a lot of people around here, including a lot of Republicans, they don't really care about the Russia investigation.
No, they think that it's just fake news. They believe what the president says, that this is the greatest witch hunt in history. And, you know, that feeling is still, a lot of congressmen can still feel that. There was an interview that Tom Rooney, who represents southern Sarasota County, gave with the New York Times this week, where Rooney disavowed Trump before the election when the Access Hollywood tape came out about Trump bragging about using a celebrity to be able to touch women. Rooney said, I'm not going to vote for him. But he said after the election, he's trying to give him the benefit of the doubt, because in his district, which is heavily Republican, the support for Trump is still palpable. I don't know how that has changed in the last week. I think maybe it's eroded a little, but it's still pretty strong.
We are just getting started with our conversation, and we'll pick it right up right after we check the weather. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, we are discussing the week in Washington. Our guests tonight are Rita Ferrandino of the Sarasota County Democratic Party, David Jolly, a former Republican congressman for Florida's 13th District, and Zach Anderson, politics editor for the Herald Tribune. Let's talk about the Republican health care bill, which it's fair to say it's on life support. The effort to pass it obviously was not helped by the terrible news that John McCain has brain cancer, which would make that vote in the short term, difficult. So what happens now? The president brought all the Republican senators in this week and said, get a bill done, before he changed the subject in terms of Russia. David, you know how things work on the Hill. Where are we?
So first of all, we're dealing with a political disaster. This is a historically unpopular bill, right? Somewhere in about 20%. We do not have a policy leader in the White House. That's clear. We know the president doesn't lead on policy. We are a deeply divided Republican Party, unable to get over 51% on the signature issue of the past 6 years. And here's why. Listen, if you're in the country tonight watching the healthcare debate, you're seeing it one of 3 ways. You either benefited through financial assistance of subsidies or Medicaid expansion. You benefited through additional coverage because of pre-existing conditions or some of the rules of Obamacare, or you were the low to medium risk family who saw your premiums go up, who were a victim of the lie of the year, who saw your plans change. Republicans are only speaking to that third group, and they're ignoring the first 2. And frankly, Democrats are probably relying on the first 2 and ignoring a little bit of the third. But that's why there is no consensus on this issue and why it's a historically unpopular bill right now.
Rita, people like David would be asking you, where's the Democratic plan to fix the Affordable Care Act?
Well, I think Democrats have been willing and have been out front in saying that they are willing to work on trying to make a solution, and they have not been called upon. And personally, I'd like to see them step out and lead on this, and I hope they do.
So Rita should be the voice of Democrats right now, because
I
for
am
years,
the voice of Democrats.
Well, listen, but for years the Democrats in Washington have said we'd be happy to sit down. But honestly, where is their plan? And there is not a plan.
So,
and I think Republicans should say to Schumer, show us your plan.
Well, Stuart Rothenberg, the columnist, wrote today, any bill that gets bipartisan support is almost certain to keep the architecture of Obamacare in place. And that is a non-starter for many Republicans who have just spent 7 years promising to get rid of it.
That's true, and I think what he's saying is this. Any bill now in 2017 will be measured against the protections that are now in law as a result of Obamacare. Listen, when Republicans ran against Obamacare in 2011, 2012, 2013, it was historically unpopular. Democrats were running away from it. The rollout was a disaster. Frankly, I won an election because so many people had anxiety over Obamacare. Now in 2017, people are relying on those additional protections. That doesn't mean Republicans need to embrace Obamacare. We can still object to the fundamental tenets of it, but we will be measured against the protections that Obamacare put into place.
And Republicans are being measured against the fact that this president has been in place 6 months, and there's been really no legislation that has come to pass. It's starting to hurt.
You know, when a couple of months ago, a lot of the members of Congress had town hall meetings that were well attended and very lively, including Gus Bilirakis, where thousands of people came out to challenge him on his vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Our colleagues at the Tampa Times went out and tried to ask all members of Congress from our area to talk about what they are doing now. And Wendy March from the Times asked a series of questions to Congressman Buchanan and only got a one-sentence statement basically saying the status quo is unacceptable. The Senate should put forward the best plan to provide affordable and access of health care for all Americans. Is there any pressure on Vern Buchanan or other members of Congress to, and I know the bill is in the Senate right now, but to get something done here?
You know, the House passed something. So Buchanan, you know, voted for a repeal and replace measure, despite a lot of pressure on the left. You know, he had a big town hall here in Sarasota where thousands of people turned out. Most of them were opposed to this GOP bill, but he moved forward with it. And you know, he's a loyal Republican, and he doesn't really see the political upside, I don't think, of equivocating too much on this or moving too much to the left. I mean, this is his district, and most of the GOP districts are really still pretty solidly conservative districts. There's not a whole lot of swing districts out there. So the idea that if they don't get something done in the Senate, they're going to try and come together and do something on a bipartisan basis, I don't see it. I think they'll do what Trump said and say, try and let the law fail, undermine it somehow, reduce the subsidies. But for the House members, especially like Buchanan or Tom Rooney locally, you know, they voted to repeal and replace. They're not going to go for something that's a lot more, you know, along the lines of just tweaking Obamacare a little bit, I don't think.
And so where, you know, Congressman, you used to be with these folks here. Do your former colleagues just stand pat?
They do. Listen, eventually Republicans do Republican things, right? And Republicans are insulated by supermajority Republican districts. Democrats are insulated by supermajority Democratic districts. The only way this changes is, frankly, a voter-led initiative in the state of Florida that revisits fair districts to say we are going to require electorally competitive districts where every member of Congress has as close to a 50-50 district as possible, where they have to try to represent everybody. But as it stands now, Republicans are going to vote to repeal Obamacare, Democrats are going to vote to keep it, and nobody will meet in the middle.
And the American public has no movement. They lose.
They lose, that's right.
You know, going back into that new polling that you said that 1 in 8 Trump voters now
Republican Trump voters.
Right. Say that they would not vote for Trump again, but still his support among the base is pretty strong. On the other hand, of those who said that they would not vote for him again, some say that they were tired of his daily trolling of Democrats, the media, and the judiciary. Some were disappointed that the Trump administration has not yet swept illegal immigrants out of their communities. Others said that the president has not ended the mistrust and hyper-partisanship in Washington as much as they hoped for.
I saw another really interesting on Fox News today. The banner said 73% of Democrats state that they would give up drinking if Donald Trump was impeached. And I thought that was a really funny Fox News headline. I mentioned that about the 1 in 8 Republicans because the independents have peeled off from Donald Trump at a far greater rate.
But let me ask you this, though. I mean, where is the Democratic messaging? Where is the strategy? Where is the game plan to come back and try to win back some of those voters, some of whom voted for Barack Obama twice and voted for Donald Trump this time?
Democrats are preparing for another wave election. Democrats are working very hard to put highly qualified candidates into seats because they're preparing for this to be a wave election that we're going to
without
see in 18.
Any kind of messaging saying that we deserve to be there?
So I can't speak to the messaging, but I think that that they're going to be rolling out a plan, and what we see here on at the ground level, at the local level, is engaging the people that they're expecting the Democrats and the independents who are so disappointed in Trump to be leading.
All right, let's take a quick break, and when we return, we'll have final thoughts from our guests, plus what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, sober living houses. Welcome back. What should we make of President Trump's first 6 months in office and the major staff changes just this week? Our guests join us right now for final thoughts. David, you have been quite a critic out there. We've seen you everywhere from CNN to MSNBC and Bill Maher. You are a right of center Republican, right. But still there are a lot of people who are watching this show tonight who are sticking with this president,
sure.
And they still support him. What would you say to them?
First, I'm going to be a Republican long after Donald Trump decides he's not. And I say that in the tone of this is a family conversation fighting for what we believe should be the face and values of the Republican Party. I think the president, Donald Trump, is wrong for our party, wrong for the country, and I intend to be a part likely of whatever primary challenge we see emerge to Donald Trump. But
that's news right there.
Well, I do, and I think you will see that emerge, and I will be an active part of it.
And you're also ruling out the party switch.
And I'm ruling out a party switch. I think it's wrong to switch parties. I'm a center-right Republican with nowhere else to go but to fight for the bull-moose Republicans within my party. But I would also say this to my Republican friends, take solace. I think the Democratic Party is just as divided today without a leader. We have a leader who divides us. The Democratic Party today, while they are mobilized by opposing Trump, I don't believe they have a unified message nor a messenger to follow going into 18.
You know, Rita, I can't tell you how many people I've talked to in the last couple of weeks, and I appreciate you being here tonight, but they're saying, they're Democrats, and they're saying that what they have seen from David Jolly and his evolution over the last couple of years, they would vote for him over what they're seeing from anybody else.
And the question
Say
is?
yes.
Yes.
The question is, does the Democratic Party lack in terms of the kinds of candidates out there that are capable of winning elections in this part of Florida?
Well, that's the whole game. The whole game is recruiting highly qualified candidates, and they've got to come from, you know, we used to have a farm system and it used to be well defined, and that's not the case anymore. And so I know locally here there's been a big resurgence in recruiting and being able to find the candidates who are going to be able to cross the aisle like David Jolly's doing.
Zach, do you see any evidence out there that if we're talking about a wave election in the midterms, that the Democrats are getting well positioned to actually take advantage of that?
Well, at least in Florida, we haven't seen a whole lot of top-tier candidates emerge yet for some of these seats, like a Vern Buchanan seat. He has a Democrat challenging him, but he's not very well known. Trump is historically unpopular. Let's not kid ourselves. He is got a 36% approval rating. He's the most unpopular president 6 months in 70 years, according to the latest Washington Post ABC poll. So there's a lot of opportunity for Democrats here, and it could be a wave election. But they really do. They have to recruit well. You have some congressional candidates like Charlie Crist up in St. Pete who have raised a lot of money, but you really haven't seen a whole lot of it. So a lot needs to happen for the party in the next few months.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. But we want to, before we go, we want to share with you what some of our viewers are saying about last night's topic, sober living houses. Florida's deadly opioid epidemic is causing the number of these facilities to increase across the state. They are meant to be a bridge between rehabilitation and returning homes. While many are reputable, there are cases, particularly on the East Coast, of sober houses taking advantage of addicts and profiting off of their relapses. For the most part, they are unregulated, and we asked you what you thought about sober houses. Lisa Marie writes, most of the facilities are legitimate facilities with people who really do care about the well-being of others. It's very sad that there are some places that prey on people that struggle with addiction. Nancy Pinnell writes, hoping the bad sober living facilities get shut down or go defunct. We need to help the transition from rehab to living in a society as a sober person. And Kevin Kolzak writes, just as long as my tax dollars are not involved. Well, what do you think about the week in Washington? Join tonight's conversation by visiting our Facebook page at facebook.com/news@7. And FYI, you can watch past discussions. They're on demand. They're available on Apple TV, Amazon Fire, and Roku. Thanks to all our guests for being here tonight. Rita Ferrandino is with the Sarasota County Democratic Party. David Jolly is a former Republican congressman for Florida's 13th Congressional District. And Zach Anderson is the political editor for the Herald Tribune.